Hello, sophomores. We're going to go over the context of our time period right now. So we are looking at our chapter for the Columbian Exchange. And first, we're going to just take a step back a little bit. So we're looking at our trade routes from the post-classical to the early modern time period. In the post-classical era from 600 to 1450, as we've discussed quite a bit, there were trade routes all over Asia and Africa. We had the Silk Road trade route around this area. We had the Indian Ocean trade route down over here, and the Trans-Saharan trade route as well that occurred. And what we had talked about was there was a lot of exchange of goods and products that went back and forth. And eventually Europe got on this trade route as well, especially after the Crusades. And the general theme in history is that the more you trade, the richer you become. So many of these places like the Muslims in the Middle East and China and West Africa became wealthier as they traded products from salt and gold to silk and others. Other ideas like gunpowder were also exchanged back and forth, as well as paper. Now, Europe eventually gets plugged into this trade route. One thing we haven't talked about as much, it's come up only a few times, is disease. Also, what happens on these trade routes is disease epidemics will go back and forth in all of this area. One that's really known is called Black Death, or the bubonic plague. This was an epidemic that started off most likely around China and Central Asia and eventually spread into Europe, and in some places in Europe killed up to 25% of the population of Europe, and even destroyed complete cities, villages. And this epidemic came because disease epidemics like viruses could come into a new land where nobody had it and could spread like wild throughout the population. So this is one negative consequence of trade that happened in Afro-Eurasia. At the same time, in the post-classical era, we talked about trade routes a little bit in the Americas, but trade routes were growing in the Americas, especially in Mexico and Central America, and also in South America. Now, a big difference is that these trade routes here never really connect. There's a lot of geographic barriers. If you see here, the land gets real thin around this area. And there's also very mountainous regions right here. So these lands never connect by land. There's never a sea trade route that fully takes effect like these ones over here. So these civilizations in the Americas are a little more isolated. And because of that, for the Americas here, in Mexico, Central America, while they did have some trade with the indigenous and native people from, today would be the United States of America, their trade routes do not grow as large. So most things that are invented here have to be invented independently, as well as here in South America as well. So trade routes are not as big, there's not as many people involved, not as many civilizations, so they're not quite as advanced as our Afro-Eurasian trade networks at this time. Also, the disease epidemics did not spread like they did in Afro-Eurasia. One reason for this is because the trade routes did not spread as far. There weren't as many different kinds of people going back and forth, so epidemics did not spread. Disease epidemics did not spread. But another thing is, in Europe, for example, one reason why the Black Death or bubonic plague was so bad was because Europe wasn't as sanitary as the Americas were at this time. People here were just generally cleaner. They bathed more. Many Europeans wrote about that when they came to the Americas, how often that the people in the Americas actually bathed. And that's one reason why the disease epidemics were so bad in Europe. So what's going to happen in this era is that Europeans are going to come to the Americas, starting in 1492. 1492, Christopher Columbus will become the first European to get to the Americas, besides the Vikings we talked about earlier. And then with him, many other Spanish and Portuguese and other Europeans will come in, and they're going to bring all new products, animals, that are going to go back and forth between these two lands. But also what's going to be huge is disease epidemics are going to spread in the Americas. Now, why is it that Europe comes to the Americas? Number one, you can see here, Europe being right here, pretty far west when it comes to Eurasia. They're able to come to the Americas. One of the biggest reasons is because of the technology they're able to develop with ships. Many of the Italian sailors who learned many of their shipping, navigating, and building during the Crusades will become the first people to sail. And they'll sail for nations like Spain and Portugal, who are seeing big population increases after the era of the Crusades, when many people come back, bring new technology, new ideas, and Europe starts advancing. And also remember, Spain was a part of a Muslim empire for quite a while, and they have a lot of the technology like the astrolabe, the compasses, and others that were brought in from the Muslim world, and Spain was able to take that, advance that technology, and use it to travel back and forth to the Americas. So this chapter is mostly about the Columbian Exchange. This you're going to want to write down. The Columbian Exchange was the exchange of goods, products, animals, and diseases between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia, or Africa, Europe, and Asia. So it'll be products, animals, diseases going back and forth between these two. And what will happen is that because these disease epidemics are so bad, much of the native population will die. In some cases, we see from 50 to 90% of the native population will die because of disease epidemics. And because of many advances technologies that the Europeans have, especially many of these advances coming from the Muslim world and China, they'll be able to use these, and they're going to be able to gain on a lot of the crops, a lot of the materials that will exist in the Columbian Exchange at this time. So right now we're going to take a look at what happens in Spain. In Spain, as you can see up here in the 8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate began an invasion of Christian Iberia. Iberia means Spain and Portugal, this peninsula that's at the end of Europe. Now, what will happen is that they'll take basically that Spain, Portugal, this whole area will become part of the Umayyad Caliphate. It will become a Muslim land. Now, what will start happening is that Christians will take 800 years to slowly retake over Spain and Portugal. In Spanish, it's called the Reconquista. And what that means is basically that Spain will slowly, over 800 years, go from being an Islamic land to a Christian land. But it won't happen all at once. Here we can see around the year 700 that almost all of Spain and all of Portugal were part of the Umayyad Caliphate, that they were Islamic lands. Now, what will happen over time is that slowly the Christians in Europe will retake the land of Spain. Now, what's interesting, around the time of the Crusades, Europeans who were living in Spain were told not to go on a crusade, but instead take part in the Reconquista, to retake Spain for Christian Europe. So what we see as the years go by, and now we're around 900 AD, or 900 CE, is that slowly Spain's becoming more and more Christian, battles are being fought, and that the Christians are taking more and more land, and Spain is slowly not becoming a Muslim land, but is becoming a Christian land. And this is going to take quite a while. It's going to take all the way until 1492, the exact same year Columbus leaves and sails on his ships for the Americas, that Spain will become a Christian land again. It's actually a reason why a lot of words in Spanish have Arabic origins. So, we'll fast forward here a little bit. You can see around like 1100 that it becomes mostly Christian and less Muslim. When we get to around the year 1200, now we're seeing it again. It is a almost all Christian land. And here we get to around the 1300s, and there's just a little tiny bit left until we get to 1492, and Spain becomes a Christian land again. And that is the Reconquista. Now, this is one of the reasons why Spain will have a lot of the Muslim technology that will be here. They're in a good location for traveling, and this explains why Spanish sailors are really the first ones who make it to the Americas. And when they do, many of the indigenous native people will die, and Spain and Portugal will be in a position where they'll be able to have a lot of land, a lot of resources, which will give them a lot of wealth, and it will cause them to become major powers in the world.